Chaz, can I ask Chaz to grab the microphone and ask a question?
Hello. Will each panel member please tell us what they think are the key areas that SMEs should be focusing on during the next 5 years in order for them to maximise their returns?
Thank you for that. I can say that we have a sort of a sister question, which I don't know, panel members might want to think about at the same time. The sister question being, are there any lessons that can be learned from the recession that can be taken into the recovery period? It strikes me that the two go hand in glove rather nicely. So, Mike, you have first take.
Good. I think the first thing is that we all need to focus on our balance sheets and make sure that the numbers add up. And if the numbers don't add up, we need to make sure they do add up. I think the second thing is, and I call this don't get lazy. If you think about it, the reason that you survive the recession is because your customers help you survive it. And you need to invest in them, and I'm not saying that you throw money at them, but you need to invest time in them so that they understand how much you appreciate them. And there is a tendency, I think, when things are easy, we get lazy with clients and we don't perhaps do the job as we should do. We maybe got too many other things going on. And in fact, those clients are the ones that have stuck with you through thick and thin. So I think the balance sheet is the key one, because clearly if you haven't got a balance sheet that works, you're not going to get very far. I think you need to avoid being lazy. And dare I say it, the final one, I've written down here, don't be crazy, which just shows that I used to try and write pop songs years ago. And what I'm getting at there is that when things are tough, you look at what things you are willing to spend your money on and things you aren't willing to spend your money on. And I call that good costs and bad costs. And unfortunately, when things get a bit better, we tend to be willing to spend more on bad costs that we wouldn't have done when we were in recession. And not having to go at the banks here, but when someone comes into your office and offers you money, there is nothing on the agreement that says it's compulsory and you have to say yes to then use that money and fritter it away on things that you didn't need in the first place. So I think for me, really it's make sure your balance sheet looks right and repair it. Make sure your clients understand how much you appreciate them and don't get lazy, and then don't go crazy the minute you've repaired your balance sheet and destroy it all over again.
Thank you. Let's go. Stephen, let's hear you.
Okay, a couple of throws off the hook on this one. A couple of thoughts then. First of all, let's start with maybe what have we learned? Well, bubbles happen, and they'll happen again. And let's remember that as we do that. As we think about, again, wearing my LEP hat now, lessons learned, communities need economic diversification. If we are too financial services centric, say, it puts us in a difficult place as these bubbles do happen. So you need to back the winners, of course, in your communities, but you need some economic diversification. And I guess the other point that I would add, supplemental to all of that, is that how important it is through a downturn, through a recession, to keep investing in your people, whether that's an apprenticeship program, the skills development, the other things that you need. It is so easy to stop doing that, either as a community, as a government, through the investment, or within your own business. So when we think about the priority areas that the London LEP has, it is about economic diversification for the greater London area, and in particular thinking about how we can expand things like the digital, creative, science, technology kind of space, where we have quite a lot happening, but perhaps not quite at the scale of financial services. How do we encourage and support the skills development all the way through the system? Jaguar Land Rover announces they're going to add 1,700 jobs up in the Midlands. Midlands manufacturers in a panic because they think their people are all going to get hoovered up because there aren't enough qualified people to do that. Stymieing economic development, impacting your own businesses. Everyone tells me how hard it is to find people.
Thank you. Andrew, the banker's perspective. Perhaps the recession first, look backwards first, then look forwards.
So I worked for Bank of Scotland in 2008, which was great. I was there for 17 years, 16 and a half was absolutely brilliant, and then the final 6 months was a mitigated disaster. So I lived what happened for those final 6 months, and I was lucky enough to join HSBC. I'll tell you one thing we can't afford to happen again is you can't afford another banking crisis. I don't think the government can afford the money to prop them up. So I think it's gradually been put in place that the regulators are making sure we've got plenty of cash in our bank to and all the other banks to make sure that can't happen again. And that goes again to the whole bubble piece. We can't rely on property. Sorry to say that. We can't rely on the fact that you're going to sell your property and it'll always settle off your debt because that ain't the way it's going to. We just can't afford to do that again because we learnt some hard lessons. HSBC did as well. Going forward, prepare yourself for interest rate rises. That sounds a bit depressing, but they're a long way off. So 2016, that's our prediction. Keeps going out, but could you afford that sort of? Could you afford an interest rate rise? I think try and think about business as usual. Be a bit more brave, a bit more cautious, but sort of going towards business as usual. I would say this because I work for an international bank. Please look outside the UK, and the world's getting smaller, and there are markets out there who love to buy British goods, and we're seeing more and more of that.
Okay, Nick, what's your view? Look backwards first, and then look forwards.
Backwards first, but I'm going to show you my age because I think one of the best lessons from the recession is that we had a recession, and come 2008. There was half a generation of business people, of professional advisors and bankers who had no experience of a recession and were therefore, I think, taken rather by surprise when it happened. Those of us with more grey hair or slightly less hair.
At least you got hair.
It was a very different. I don't think I'd ever seen a banking crisis. Nobody had seen a banking crisis like that. But at least there was a familiarity that this wasn't some earth-shattering, awful event that was going to bring the whole world to its knees. That recessions had happened before, there had been downturns, and there will be recoveries. And I think we had the banking crisis itself was an exceptional symptom of the economic downturn. But
It was different this time, wasn't it?
It was
Because
different this time.
The people ringing up and panicking this time were people with money in the bank. Whereas the previous times, the people who thought they were smug were the people with money in the bank.
Yeah,
but
but
yet they were the ones panicking most.
But I think once the immediate crisis and it became clear that the major banks weren't going to fail and we were left with, if you like, a good old-fashioned recession, then it became much easier to handle once people got used to that idea, got used to the fact that there would be no return to normal because there is no normal. So I think that the fact that we're all quite a bit wiser than we were 5 years ago has been an enormous and great lesson.
So it's a lesson, though, that we can take.
Yeah.
Other than it's normal.
And when we have our recovery, we can then sit down with our crystal balls and work out when the next recession will be, because there will be one.
I'm no politician, but I think Gordon Brown. Yeah, I don't favour anyone, but Gordon Brown, at the time of crisis, he threw everything in the kitchen sink at it, and thank God he did. I think. Yeah. It was scary. It was scary. If you ever read, it was a Chancellor at the time, Darling's book. It was. We were a few hours from pretty cataclysmic. The cash machines not working stuff. So, yeah, Gordon Brown should be patted on the back for that time and that crisis.
Okay, well, there's an opinion.
But Gordon Brown was also...
Gordon
Brown was also the Chancellor who said he
Yeah.
brought an end to the business cycle, so, yeah.
Well, he did. He brought an end to boom and bust.
Yeah,
He did.
He got rid of the boom bit.
got the bus.
So, Simon.
Well, I came into property 23 years ago in the middle of the last recession, so I have some memory of the last recession. I think the lessons that I have most clearly been driven home is really you need to rely on yourself because no one else is going to help you. And what I mean by that is you need to keep your borrowings to a minimum, if at all, if you're fortunate enough to not to have to, but if you do, keep them reasonable and at a level that you can afford, because when it all goes to pot, the banks are going to pull the rug from under your feet, and they've pulled the rug from under the feet of many, a very wealthy client, and they've been very unreasonable about it. So I think you need to make sure that you're as self-sufficient as you can be and for as long as possible, and that you have a plan B, C, D, and so on. I think in terms of other lessons, well, my ex-senior partner used to say you can't eat turnover, and I don't know whether you know what that means, but basically it means turnovers for show and profits for dough. And it means don't buy volume work, stick to what you're good at, make sure you're running a business, make sure there's no place for ego in a business, and to make sure that you've always got the core, I mean, it's your balance sheet working, it's making sure that the core essentials of your business are working. I think service. We've talked about procurement, and we've talked about people coming back to realise that actually, if you offer a good service and people value that service, they're willing to pay for it, and they value that, and making sure it's personal. Now, I can't make lots of Simon Tilsters, and you wouldn't want there to be lots of Simon Tilsters, but at Streathans we make sure that our staff are trained, and that when you deal with a director or an associate or a senior surveyor or a graduate, they all know what they're talking about, and they've all been trained in the service that we wish to provide. And that's what a client wants, and that's the sort of product that we want to sell. And you must never forget, as Mike says, who's paying your bills. I think you've heard enough from me on that, but those are the sorts of lessons and key things going forward.
I mean, from the world of accountancy, the lesson from looking backwards from the recession is people have been banging on about banks having to rebuild their balance sheets, but actually there's a hell of a lot of SME businesses out there who need to rebuild their balance sheets. There's far too many SME businesses, when times were good, help themselves to the money. When I say help themselves, they would take bonuses, take large dividend payments, take it any way they could. And when times get tough, those habits can be very hard to kick. And when times were good in those halcyon years leading up to the credit crunch, money was relatively easy to get. Bank of Scotland in particular were pretty liberal with their funds.
Wasn't my fault.
When people talk about recessions, I've lost track of how many recessions I've probably created, but that, if there's one crucial thing, people need to understand that they need to have strong balance sheets, and they need to keep that balance sheet strong going forward, and they must not be deluded into thinking that, oh, it's all over now, let's get that remuneration pouring out again.
I don't think the banks pulled as many rugs as you think, because it would have been far worse if they had.
No, the rogues actually aren't the banks.
No, the rugs. Pull the rugs from the customers.
No, we've got a question coming up, let me say, but I won't preempt the question, but
Sorry.
The bankers aren't the rogues. There are other people out there who are far more roguish, but we'll come to that in a moment. But going forward, I echo what Simon and Stephen said. You need a well-trained, a well-educated, well-motivated workforce. It's about people. Most businesses are about the people, particularly in the service sector. It's all about the people, and you need good people doing the right thing in the right way, and for them to do the right thing in the right way, they need the tools. You've got to give them the right sort of pencil, the right sheet of paper, but they need the right training, and they need the right leadership, and those are the things that I think businesses ought to really focus on going forward. Anyway, that's only my view.